What's up, guys? Shane here with the Rice Creek Bushcraft. I've been asked many times on doing a video on sharpening convex edges. So today what we're going to do, we're going to make it pretty simple, try to make it quick as possible. I'm not going to completely sharpen a knife because it takes too long. But what I'm going to do is explain what I do, how I do it, and why you need to do it. So first of all, I have some pictures here that I drew. This right here is a typical convex edge. This is what they should look like when you start out with one. When you get one from the factory, when you get a new knife, it's going to look like this. It's going to be just kind of a long sweeping taper into a nice fine point. The problem is, over time with use and wear, they end up looking like this. That nice fine point becomes rounded, and then it no longer cuts well. So people have a convex edge and they're lost if they can't just strop it or whatever. A lot of guys use sandpaper, whatever. You can do it on a stone, and I know it seems completely backwards to sharpen something round on something flat like these stones, but it's very possible and it's very easy, and I'll explain to you how I do it. So you've got this rounded edge. We've got to get it back to here. That's our goal. So what I do is I completely V-edge this rounded portion. So this portion you can see that's kind of scribbled out right in here and right on here on each side, I remove all that and I make it just a V-edge. Then from there, I start to round it back out and turn it into convex. So we're going to just demonstrate on this knife. It's just a Condor Nessmuck. It's nothing fancy. I'm not going to completely sharpen the knife. It's going to take too long. So I'm just going to explain to you how I do it. So what I have personally, and you can have different sets of stones, what I have is a 400 grit Chaucera Splash and Go. I have a 1000, and I have a 3000, and then I have a leather strop. This is what they consider, what they call a bench strop. Huge piece of wood with a piece of leather on it. That's how I finish. So what I do, like I said, these are Splash and Go Japanese water stones. You don't soak them in water. It will destroy them. You just literally splash water on them. So I always have a cup here with me, and I just kind of cup it with my hands, get some water on here, get the stone wet all the way across. That's it. That's all I do. So in order to get ourselves back to this point, and this is a great knife to use because it's extremely rounded. It wouldn't cut anything. I mean, it's so dull, it's pathetic. So what I'm going to do is lay this knife, I gotta get a different picture here. I'm going to lay this knife on this really rounded portion, okay? I'm not going to lay it right down here on the point because you're just going to continually round it. So I'm going to lay it up here, and then I'm going to lay it here, and here I'm going to work my way down until I have a nice taper again, and then we're back to this. So I'm going to show you how. This is my 400 grit. This is where I start. So you take the knife and you lay it flat, then you raise it up, and you can feel this right here. You can kind of feel this transition from the apex. Just work that above the cutting bevel. Work the apex. And then this is the motion you should just back and forth. And what I'm doing here is I'm creating what they call a scratch pattern. And that's what a scratch pattern is. I'm taking this right here and I'm scratching all this portion of the blade. I'm scratching all this. So I'm going to create my scratch pattern. I'm going to show you guys what it looks like. That's your starting point. So I'm just using a back and forth motion. I know a lot of guys will tell you to rock. You do rock. I don't rock. I hold it very rigid, and I'm trying to flatten this back out. I am not rocking this way and that way. You're going to hear that all the time from other guys' knife sharpening videos. I'm not saying they're wrong. What I'm saying is this is the way I do it, and it works really well for me. So So I'm going to show you the scratch pattern, because this is where it all starts. You see my stone starting to get a little dry here. That's all I do, put some more water on there. Hold the same angle. I think that's a big part of sharpening convex, is people are worried about angles, and I'm going to explain that as we go. So after I get my scratch pattern on this portion of the blade, above the apex, okay, another thing I forgot to tell you guys, always have a towel handy because this is messy, nasty work. See if you guys can see where this knife blade is scratched. So it's about a 1/16 of the way up the blade. You can see all the way along above the cutting edge is scratched. So I have not worked on the cutting edge itself at all yet. I'm going to continually do this until I get it almost flat. Then what I do, if you look at the stone here and you look at the angle that I have the knife to create that scratch pattern, okay, now I'm going to lift this blade up a couple degrees, about like this. I know it's hard to see, but I'm just raising it up a couple degrees, and I continue my scratch pattern. So that's where I'm doing it. I'm going to raise it up about this far, and I'm going to do the same thing. So basically what I'm creating is this. I'm just creating a bunch of small flat spots. So you see in between each one of those dots, that's a flat spot. That's what I'm creating right now. I'm still not worrying about the cutting edge. So I've raised it up from the first scratch pattern. I'm working on my second. Just a back and forth motion, guys, and hold your hand steady. A lot of times I use my finger and I put it on right on the cutting edge so I can make sure that I'm staying the same height on the back, on the spine of the knife. So I've taken my scratch pattern. I started about a 1/16 or so, and then I move up towards the spine every time. I'm continually raising the blade until I work up to the spine. Okay, so I have started toward the spine and worked my way to the cutting bevel. It's starting to get rounded here. So I've got to do that on both sides. I've got to do the same thing on both sides. This way, work my way up, this way, until I can feel it's starting to get sharp now. I can start to feel that it's not so rounded. I've got a bunch of little flat spots. So how I finish off, and I know guys do it different, how I finish off is I have to blend all those little flat spots together. So I'll start with a knife almost flat on the stone, not completely, but almost flat. And I'll draw it this way, and then I'll raise it up a couple degrees, and I'm going to do this to the extreme so you guys can see what I'm saying here. And then I raise the knife up this way. So I take the spine towards the ceiling. So here, I do this, and then I raise it up a couple degrees, and then I raise it up a couple degrees, and I raise it up until I think I'm pretty much on the actual cutting edge of the knife. Okay, so now I've rounded off all those little flat spots I've made pretty well. Now I'm going to start back in the very first position, and I'm going to bring the knife towards me and away from me. And as I'm doing this, I'm lifting the knife, the spine of the knife, towards the ceiling, and I'm lowering it back down. So now it's flat, and then I raise it up a couple degrees, and then I raise it up until I know I'm right on the cutting edge. Then I lower it back down, then I raise it up, and I'm just doing it like this, guys. If you guys can see this knife, I'm just raising it up, I'm tilting it down, I'm raising it up, all the while doing this. So what I've done, is taken, when I initially started, I made this portion flat. I made it basically a V grind, and now from all these little flat portions I was talking about, I've just started to round them together, and I have to do that on both sides. So now I'm pretty much, after I do both sides, I'm pretty much back to here. That's the shape, that's the look that I'm after. So I've got the knife pretty good. It's pretty sharp. You know, I've done both sides. It's starting to cut. I take my 400, set that aside, and I go to my 1000. I do the same exact thing. I start in the same position with the spine of the knife very close to the stone. Back and forth, back and forth. Then I raise it up a couple degrees. Then I do this flat, and I raise it up. The same thing we did on the first stone. I do that on both sides. Okay. Now the knife's pretty darn sharp. It's pretty sharp. Set that aside. I go to my 3000. Okay, so a 3000 grit, it is still cutting the steel, but essentially what you're doing is polishing it, and you're taking out all the burrs, all the imperfections. So I do the same thing, but I just do it faster. I raise the knife up and down more rapidly. I don't stay on one spot very long, and I just polish all of that back out, up and down, up and down, up and down. So the knife's doing this the whole time. Okay, so once I do both sides, now I've got a nice scratch pattern from where I started. You know, however far up the spine you went, or up the blade you've went, I have a nice scratch pattern. I take my strop, and I start with a knife almost completely flat. The spine is almost on my strop, but not completely. I raise it up just a little bit, and I just start doing this. Okay, now I come up a couple degrees. Do the same thing. Okay, and the whole while I'm feeling the edge and seeing what it feels like. Do the other side, same thing. Okay, once I've come all the way up and I've got that apex, so I've scratch patterned all of this all the way down. Now I've got this apex. There's a possibility right here at the cutting edge, there's a little bit of a burr. Okay, that's where we end up. That's where a lot of guys, I'm not going to say fail, but they don't get the knife as sharp as they think. They should have it. So what you have to do is take your knife and you want to drag this across your strop, almost literally right on the cutting edge. So you're at more than a 45, but you're not at a 90. Back and forth, back and forth. And that usually finishes off a really nice, sharp, convex edge. And if it still doesn't feel just right, you probably have a burr that's rolled one way or the other. You can see I have this nice wood block here. I just cut it. Now I've taken care of those burrs, and I continue to strop, and I continue to strop. So now we talked about kind of how I do it. This is what it could look like. So what I've done with this knife, and I'll explain a couple different ones. This one I completely reprofiled from the spine all the way down to the cutting bevel. I completely reprofiled it. You can see it's nice and sharp, and it's pretty much a polished blade. If you happen to have a saber ground convex, you can see what I've done with this one is I've just come to basically this primary bevel. I've only done the primary bevel, but it's the same. You're doing the same exact thing. And here's another knife that I did. This is somewhat of a saber ground. It has this little bit of a secondary bevel. The primary bevel, I've done the whole thing. So it's pretty much a polished blade. So anyways, I hope that helps, guys. I know a lot of people have asked me about this. That's how I do it. It works for me. Maybe next time we'll do a video on doing a scanty grind, which is super, super easy. Much easier than this. And I want to say this isn't hard. I think it takes more time to get good at sharpening a convex edge. It takes more time. But once you get it, you got it. And once you get your knife to this point, back to the factory, out in the field, wherever you are, just strop it. And don't raise your spine up too far to the ceiling. Keep it so it's just kind of what I call just tickling the cutting edge. You just want to tickle it both sides. So hey guys, thanks for watching. I appreciate you spending your time with me. Have a good one.